Hey coaches, today we're going to be talking about climate conscious coaching with Zoë Cohen from Shine Coaching and Consultancies coming from the UK today. And this is something it's been really interesting talking to her in the pre-interview about really how climate fits in with coaching. And we're going to dig in today to help you understand how climate should be fitting in with your coaching practice. Zoë, thank you so much for being here today. Maybe you could just jump right in and kind of give us a definition maybe of what climate conscious coaching is. Hop right in.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Brighton. Well, thanks very much for having me on this video. Appreciate it, and look forward to maybe some feedback from your viewers around the US and beyond. What's climate conscious coaching? Well, it evolved out of my head and my heart and my coaching experience earlier this year, beginning of this year, really, and thinking about actually, the reality of the climate and environmental emergency is increasingly obvious, I hope, to everyone. And I hope everyone who's watching this video is kind of like, yeah, okay, it's happening, it's real. As coaches, we have a role to play as everyone else in our respective countries. And also, as coaches, we have, I think, a particular role and opportunity to be able to play a part. So there's kind of the piece that's about us being practitioners, business people in a generic sense, and then there's the piece about us being coaches and how can we bring what we do and the way that we do it to this most pressing issue of our time.
It is interesting because I'm here on the left coast of the States, so I think people are more conscious of this. I think I saw it on LinkedIn when you first posted about the intersection between coaching and climate, and I was like, oh wow, yeah, there's definitely something there. I am from the coastal areas of the United States, the edges, and of course we have the flyover states in the middle, which might have a different view on climate change. So is this something just for the political left or something for everyone?
I'm a believer in the science, Brighton. So, the science tells us that what's happening is happening, and it doesn't actually matter what our orientation politically or socially or our ethnic background or whatever. I mean, of course, these things matter to us as people, but actually in terms of the climate impact and whether the science is the science or not, it just is. Unfortunately, for individuals and communities in the global south are being affected more and more seriously than many people in Western countries. But, you guys are California and many other places in Midwest and so on, whether it's flooding, fires, Australia, New Zealand, heat waves in the UK, flooding in the UK, it's increasingly everywhere. It's just worse, quicker in the global south. So actually, it doesn't really matter what we vote. We either have been affected or we're going to be affected. So I really, everything's political when you're human, but actually it's beyond politics, to be totally honest.
And let's talk about clients, because although the science is clear, sometimes the people's attitudes are different. Tell me a little bit about how this approach could change. If you're coaching, like you're a life coach coaching millennials, they're in, one mindset, almost all of them, it seems to be, climate emergency. And then you've got CEOs, which probably have a much bigger potential impact on what's going to happen with climate, but are maybe motivated by different things like money. So tell us a little bit about what coaching might look like with those different types of clients.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Brighton. And I'm not sitting here professing to have all the answers. I think I know there are a small but increasing number of coaches around in different countries grappling with these same questions. So I'm not alone. I've just maybe been proactive in developing my own approach and my own model around climate conscious coaching and what that might mean for coaches. So we maybe come on to that shortly, but I'm sure many of your members that watch these videos would be familiar with John Whitmore, for example, one of the kind of founding fathers of coaching. And John Whitmore talking about one of the key roles of coaches is to raise awareness. I think we would all know that as coaches. So actually bringing in the reality in some way or other into our conversations, so acknowledging the reality in a not necessarily in a political way, but acknowledging that reality I think is something that increasingly coaches can be doing, and I would put myself out there and say should be doing, because I think we have an ethical responsibility. If we're going to raise awareness, that every organisation, every entity, we exist in this world and we impact on the world. So another way of looking at it, perhaps, Brighton, is to inquire with people what they care about most, what they value most, what they care about most, because actually, when we think about that, it raises our awareness potentially that the things that we care about most for all of us, regardless of who we are, where we live, what we do, are if not being impacted, are going to be impacted by what's to come. Whether that's walks in the countryside with our family, whether it's our favourite meal, whatever it is, these things in a short or medium term are going to be impacted if they're not already being impacted. So there's a kind of way of connecting at a very human level to what we care about. And then, from a big business, medium or big business point of view, we can also talk about or potentially connect or raise awareness of the very real business risks. There are many financial bodies, World Bank, IMF, etc., raising concerns. Climate and extreme weather events are at the top of a lot of risk registers for global organisations like the Davos, etc. They're up there with naming these as the top organisational risks. So boards need to be aware of these if they're not already, and thinking about how can they both mitigate the risks through what they do as businesses, if we're talking about big businesses particularly, but also how are they going to be adapting to what's to come? Because when one educates oneself about the science, we understand that this is turning a huge giant supertanker. So we have to do an awful lot to turn it, but before it turns, it's going to get a lot worse. And that's just science, that's just physics. There's no belief in there, it's just physics.
Yeah, that is kind of the sad truth is this ship has been going this direction for a long time. But I like how you talked about that in terms of, there are true business impacts for CEOs. So there's kind of like the left-brained way to approach it. But I think also just one of the realities that I've heard from lots of executive coaches is that, there's a lot of life coaching in there too. That there are the individual, each person is a person deep down below. If they're a CEO, maybe they've got a millennial child or a younger child.
Yeah.
That walk in the park is part of their real life.
I think that's absolutely right. And if nothing else, if not thinking about ourselves, thinking about our children. And I think what a lot of people don't realise still is that the timescales are such that it's happening now. It's not I think a lot of people have thought until recently, and maybe some still do, that this is something that our grandchildren are going to have to worry about. But it's us and our kids. It's right now, isn't it? So I think helping in the safe, confidential space that, of course, coaches are great at creating that compassionate safe, confidential space where execs at all levels and people in all walks of life can actually voice those fears.
Yeah, I think that's true, because it could be, in places that it's not a popular conversation to have.
Yeah, only this morning I was working with a client for the first time, actually. Obviously, I won't mention any details, of course, but the client who's quite senior in healthcare. I brought the topic into the conversation as part of my values because it was our first conversation, and I don't think it would have come in otherwise, but actually that enabled the person, because they're of Asian heritage, to talk about actually acknowledging that they've seen at first hand when they go home, once a year, back to their families or whatever, their friends, actually to acknowledge that they see what's happening firsthand. And they know it. They just don't bring it up into conversation. So, I think for people who've got heritage in other parts of the world, they know this stuff.
Something else I wanted to kind of talk about is how to bring up the topic. And that's something, in terms of your values. So clearly they have, the client has the client's values, but that first meeting establishing, kind of your relationship. So yeah, how does that come up? Or how can other coaches bring that up, I guess, is
being really explicit that this is part of my values, and allowing that to be a conversation to inquire about the client's values and how does this show up for them, and that can take you to all different places. I think that again, it then varies on, what is the client's agenda, what do they want to work on, where are they in their life, in their organisation? Because I'm an exec coach, so I focus, on that primarily managers, leaders, senior leaders in organisations, and there's a myriad of ways. So, for example, I've been working with a senior guy in the telecoms industry, and actually, a lot of the work he wanted to do was about his purpose. That's a gift because he also got young children, I think 3 very young children. So, inviting those conversations about the perspective of if you become CEO of this business, how do you want to run this business so that your kids will be proud to work in it, or that so this business influences the world so that you're, in a way that your kids would want. And there's also opportunities to bring in more indigenous people's perspectives of asking, if you take an indigenous perspective potentially of thinking several generations ahead, as a leader and a business person or as a citizen, how do we act that actually has in mind not just our children, but, generations to come? How can we be the best ancestors possible? So there's lots of different ways. That's just some examples where there's empty chairs, there's metaphors, there's coaching outside, walking in nature. There's lots of different ways that different coaches are approaching this. I don't think there's one way, but I really believe, Brighton, that how we work with clients on this it's only one aspect. It's only one domain really of my climate conscious coach approach, which is much broader and much bigger picture.
Yeah, and I definitely want to touch on your 9 domains model, but I want to go one more because you are an executive coach, but maybe you can talk a little bit about how how climate change is impacting millennials in particular, or younger people, and how that just may affect how they're coming to coaching, or what kind of, I don't want to say baggage, but what's in their background that's coming to coaching.
Brighton, that's a really big question, billions of millennials on the planet. So I don't want to generalize too much because millennials get really stereotyped, right? So, but what is really clear is, what clear to me in my own, world and my own experience directly and indirectly, it's more and more common for younger and younger people to be more and more aware. And I'm sure that's probably just obvious, but there are, of course, still some segments of community or communities of whatever reason who are less aware. But I think that, I hear more and more examples of middle-aged and older people saying, yeah, actually, it's my kids that are nagging me to change, or it's my kids that are holding me to account, or it's my grandchildren that are raising this. Myself and a couple of colleagues were actually speaking at a conference, a coaching and mentoring conference in the UK only yesterday. And we were running a workshop on this area, and actually, there were some people coaches in their 50s kind of thing saying, yeah, my kids are raising this. These conversations are increasingly being had. So I guess I'm more aware. I have a 16-year-old daughter as well, so I'm more aware of perhaps Gen Z than millennials. So I think there's a real mix amongst millennials, because actually there's a big age group of millennials. So I think probably younger millennials are more aware. Maybe older millennials are in the kind of, zone of work, work, treadmill, mortgage, all that kind of stuff more. And I think that, the more that life takes over, we're in that phase of work, mortgage, kids, and we're just in a blur of survival sometimes. So I think it depends on our age and stage, and a whole lot of other factors. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm seeing is not only are kids more conscious of climate change, but also more anxious, I guess would be the other thing.
Yeah, if you're talking specifically about like climate grief, eco grief, which is a thing, of course it's a thing, and it's now, for a little while now, I think it's in the DSM, it's in the medical definitions, isn't it, as a thing, a diagnosis. Personally, I'm going to be a little bit maybe provocative for some folks watching this now, but I don't believe it's a mental health problem. I believe it's a completely rational response to the facts, to where we are. I think it's not an illness. It's a completely rational response. Yes, there are increasing numbers of people experiencing different stages and levels of grieving for what we're losing, what we've lost, what we'll never gain back, and what's to come. And I think I'm noticing in myself and others that grieving and eco grief and climate grief, whatever you want to call it, happening at many stages. So grandparents who are being hit by what they know that their little ones, the grandchildren are going to experience, through to lots of parents, young mothers of young children, and also children themselves. I think that there's a real cross section of society beginning to feel this, and of course, depending on coaches' niche, I'm not very keen on that word, but depending on the kind of work that you guys as coaches do and whatever your work is, if you haven't seen this already, I think you're going to start to see it.
Well, maybe actually this is a great transition to something that I was thinking about is this a niche? Like, is climate coaching a niche, or is this something that just fits in?
I would say absolutely no, Brighton. I mean, a no but or no and. I think there are small numbers of coaches who are starting to kind of actually develop business models, niches in this area. But I think that's a subset. I think that's a tiny, tiny subset, because actually and this, I'm sorry to go on about it, this is where my model and my 9 domains come in. But actually what we need to do is take responsibility as adults that we're all part of this system. We've all created this system. We're all adults, we all consume, we fly, we do all of these things, we buy stuff we don't need. Everyone in the Western world does it, and that's why we are where we are, yeah? Well, of course, it's not all about consumers. We need massive system change. That's another conversation. But if we see this as a niche for a small subset of coaches to do a small subset of work, or maybe a little bit of pro bono work, we're completely missing the point.
Yes, I think that is important, because when I first read that on your post on LinkedIn, I was like, oh, what a cool little niche. And then as we got to know each other, I was like, whoa, this is something for everybody. This is a global perspective. It's almost a competency that we need to have. And speaking of that those 9 domains, that you do have a video about that. I'm going to put a little link up here, but if you want to continue watching this one, I'm going to link it at the end of this video too, so that you can go and dig a little bit more into Zoe's work.
Thank you for that. And you've reminded me of something, Brighton. You mentioned just there, which is a really important point about actually this. It sounds like this is a set of competencies. And I completely agree. I think it is a set of competences that actually all professions need. But I'm a coach, so I'm owning it in the coaching profession. And actually, I've been with colleagues, I've been seeking to actively influence the coaching profession, and we're making a bit of progress there. So I'm hoping that some stuff's going to start to come out from the international coaching bodies on this agenda. Maybe not as much as I'd like, but I think some progress is going to start to be made, because coaches, we're no different from anyone else, are we? As coaches, we sometimes need permission giving to actually take some risk and put ourselves out there, maybe some people more than others, and that's just humanity. So hopefully it will help people to feel like it's okay to start to speak up when the professional bodies maybe start to speak up a little bit more themselves, because they've been pretty silent on this issue.
Well, I know we've got some changes coming up in the core competencies. I don't know exactly what things are changing and how they're going to mesh together. But I think that is a good place for us to kind of wrap up this interview. However, I want people to know more about you and how they can, kind of follow you, because you are a thought leader in this area. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about you and where people can find you.
The best place to find me, where I'm most prolific, is on LinkedIn. So if you just search Zoë Cohen on LinkedIn, there aren't that many of us, so I will pop up, and I am prolific. I have about 16,500 followers, or connections. So and I post pretty much daily, if not more often than that. So and I post largely on this agenda in totality. So I know I have quite a big following amongst not just coaches of the professions, but a number of coaches tell me that they use my posts and my updates and my articles to help educate themselves and help raise awareness themselves, but within their colleagues and their organizations as well. So that's really nice feedback to get. I mean, in terms of a little bit of background about me very quickly, my first career was as a director in healthcare in the UK. But I've been coaching, way before I even knew what it was, since I was kind of yay high kind of thing. And I've been a full-time exec coach, independently running my practice for just over a decade. And I guess in terms of kind of being explicit about who I really am and breaking this wall down between my professional self and my true full beliefs as a person and a human and a mother, that's really been from the beginning of this year. So in terms of being much more activist and stepping up into this space as an activist and a coach, because I think we can wear many hats. So I've been in this space for about a year now, and intend to continue to try to make as much difference as possible, and to support and challenge, as we should do, all support and challenge this profession and other professions to step up.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for sharing this with us today. And also thank to all of you who are watching this and who are thinking about how to tweak your practice a little bit more in the direction of being climate conscious. So I mentioned earlier the video, the nine domains video that Zoe's done, and you can click up here to watch that video next. And you can also click down here to watch some more videos that I've done of interviews that are specific for the coaching profession. Thanks for watching.